Hello, 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 guys. I am back. I've been gone for a while, had to focus on some other stuff, but now I'm back and I'm super excited for it, because that means now I can focus a lot more on making videos and of course a lot more on making music. So I'm super happy and excited for that, and if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and do that, because there will be a lot more content coming from me in the future. So, to kick things off, I thought I wanted to go ahead and do a walkthrough of my latest release called Gravitational Forces. If you're not aware, this is my newest release. It released just a week ago, and in this video I want to do a walkthrough where I show you all of the elements in the track. Of course, all of the important ones like the lead, the kicks, and the intros and so on, but also some of the more technical parts, the interesting stuff for producers. So the plan is to play it through from one into the other, and again just do a showcase of the important elements and the technical stuff. Here we go. So looking at the intro, you guys know I like to incorporate these long theatrical and emotional bits, and this intro is no different. So we had a lot of violins, a lot of strings, so let's play it through and focus on the individual elements.
What is the source of our existence? In the cosmic current. In echoes of space and time.
Alright, so first we have the main violins here. So this is a basic sample from the Logic sampler, the stock plugin. Nothing fancy, very basic, and on its own not very interesting sounding. And because it's actually a very low quality sample used here, you can actually see in this case that I was lacking a lot of the high-end information in this violin part. And so to compensate for that, I had to fill in with some white noise. So this is a stream of white noise played in succession. Again, the white noise is EQ'd to only fill in the very part that I needed in the top end here. And then I used a volume shaper to basically match the white noise to play whenever the hits of the violin is playing. And so this way I got to fill out the gap of this very high-end frequency that I thought I needed for the violin part. This is actually a technique I used for many things in my projects, especially in the high end, whenever I feel like there really is a need to fill a gap within a frequency range. You can often use white noise to fill in that gap if you use it cleverly, as in this situation. So the next part is this string part. So this entire part is again made with stock Logic plugins. In this case it's the strings plugin, and so it has many layers. So one layer is playing the chord, some other layers is just playing a constant tone, and this specific layer is playing the very high ends. So the next thing is the low end of the intro part. And this is made from 2 instances of Silent 1. So the first layer is a very basic sine wave. But the important part here is, again, it's a sine wave, it's playing a stable low note, and it's in a mono state. And then we combine that with another instance, but this one is stereo. So in this case, 1 oscillator, 8 voices, and a descent on the detune. And then we're filtering out all of the high frequencies, so we're only left with the low frequencies. So without this, it's gonna sound like this. So just a very basic saw wave, and then again we filter out all of the high frequencies, so we're left with the low frequencies. And this combined with the mono signal sounds like this. And there's a reason why we're not only satisfied with the 1 layer like the low stereo layer here. If you notice, the low end is moving a lot, it's very inconsistent. And so this is a natural effect happening of the detuning of the 8 voices in this stereo layer, but it creates a very unstable low end. And so often we want a more stable low end. So we can combine that with a more stable layer, which again is just this sine wave of a mono low end. So we have this layer creating the stable low end in a mono signal, which is, again, it's 100% stable, it's the same level all throughout. And we combine that with this stereo layer, which takes care of the more interesting stereo information in the low end. So we have a stable low end, but we also have a stereo low end. And so this is a technique I use pretty much all the time where I need a low end, because often you also need the low end to be somewhat stereo, and you also need it to be stable. And again, this is a brilliant technique to ensure that your low end is actually stable, but at the same time you have the option of making it stereo. So for the last important element in the intro, we have the vocals, and of course I used AI to generate these vocals. On their own, the vocals are very stale and uninspiring, so of course we have to beef them up with a lot of effects. And so without any effects, this is what the vocals sound like.
Existence. What is the source of our existence? Echo. In echoes of space and time.
Right, so extremely boring and stale. So first off, we beef up the actual vocal with all of these plugins, so a lot of compressing and EQing.
Existence. What is the source of our existence? Echo. In echoes of space and time.
And then we make it more interesting with some stereo effects, which I'm using send effects for. So the first send effect here is a Doppler, or more or less a Haas effect applied as a send.
Existence. What is the source of our existence? In echoes of space and time.
So as you can hear now, we introduce some stereo information into the vocals. And so since I'm using this as a send effect, first off, the original vocal is playing, then right after we have the vocal playing 1 instance to the left, and shortly after we have 1 instance to the right as well. And so again, this is kind of the Haas effect, which in reality is just, again, the vocal playing from left to right really fast, but it's perceived as the vocal or the sample being stereo. The next effect is a reverb.
Existence. What is the source of our existence? In echoes of space and time.
So this of course just creates a long tail and a lot of stereo information again in the vocal, a lot of space. And so the final effect is a delay combined with another reverb.
Existence. 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 What is the source of our existence? What is the source of our existence?
And so for the delay, I'm using a stock Logic plugin, which is called the Delay Designer. This is a very complex and very capable delay. It actually is a lot better than a lot of bought plugins out there. In fact, this is my main delay plugin because it is so capable, and it's so good for these situations where you need a highly customized delay. Because with this plugin, you can design anything to your liking. Apart from the send effects, I've incorporated some reverse reverb leading up to each of the samples.
What is the source of our existence? Existence.
And also I've incorporated this second reverse reverb, which is an effect inside of the reverb itself. So it takes the original vocal and then it reverses it, and that is the reverb created. That alone sounds like this. So it sounds kind of like a ghost effect, but then combined with every other effect of the vocal, it sounds like this.
Existence. What is the source of our existence? In the cosmic current.
So really interesting vocals from something very basic out of an AI.
Existence. What is the source of our existence? In the cosmic current. In echoes of space and time.
Alright, coming up next is the main part, which is the lead. This part consists of 3 different elements. So we have the violins on top again, then we have the low end, and then we have the lead itself. So let's start with the lead. So the lead itself consists of 4 layers. It has a top lead, it has an assisting lead for the top lead, and then it has 2 chord layers. So the top layer sounds like this. And that layer is produced by Vital. I don't use Vital a lot. I guess if I wanted to use this kind of plugin, I would use a plugin like Serum. But in this case, I just wanted to explore the plugin. And so this layer is created by a single saw wave with some random noise and LFO linked to the pitch. The next layer is an assisting lead to the top lead, so this layer is made with Silent 1. It has 2 oscillators with 8 voices each, a saw wave and a lot of detune. So in a lot of cases this would be the setup, with one lead playing a more clean sort of lead and typically a mono instance of that top lead, and then you would have something like this to assist the top lead, to kind of beefen it up, to make it more stereo and to make the top lead more aggressive or give it more character. And so that sounds like this. The next layer, the first layer of the chords, is a more detuned chord layer. Again, 2 oscillators, 8 voices and a saw wave. A little bit more controlled detune. And then we have a little bit of an attack produced by the envelope down here. And same goes here to complement the more detuned layer of this chord layer. We have a more clean layer on the next one. So this is also made with Silent One. We have 2 oscillators, 8 voices on saw waves. And again, you'll see a little bit more of a clean, less detuned signal coming from this one. And in this instance, the attack part, or the more clicky nature of the attack, is caused by the settings of the ADSR, as well as, of course, we have an OTT over here and a compressor as well. So next thing we have to look at is the reverb of the lead. And so this is made with FabFilter's reverb. And of course we have a docking or a sidechain going on. So whenever the lead is playing, the reverb is docking. And whenever the lead is not playing, the reverb is rising up to the normal level. Okay, let's take a look at the low end of the main part of the lead here. Same thing here, you'll find that we have a stable mono layer and then we have another layer representing the stereo information and that crispiness on top. So the mono layer, a Silent One, actually just a simple saw wave. This is the equivalent of just one layer of a saw wave. Sounds like this alone. And so we've just filtered out all of the high information with a basic EQ. And again, this layer is responsible for bringing that consistent low end that you'll want in a lead. The same energy happening on every stroke. That is why we have 2 layers. Again, a mono stable low end layer and one doing the stereo information. And the layer with the stereo information is sounding like this. And so again, we have 2 oscillators here, and we actually have a third one as well, but the 2 oscillators is panned one left, one right to really make it stereo, and then we have one being in the middle to be more stable. Again, we have 8 voices on each of the layers and all of them saw waves, and we have a decently clean detune setting here. The effects that is on this layer is really what's beefing it up. So we have some compression, we have some EQing, we have some widening, and then we have a drive in the end, or some distortion actually. So it really makes sure that we have that consistent high-end energy in this layer. And by now you've noticed that there's a pump-in effect going on. And of course that is some sidechaining produced by this multiband compressor. So this is also a technique I always use in my tracks, because whenever you have a low end that also has a lot of high frequencies in it, it is going to conflict with the actual lead itself if you don't somewhat handle it. So in this case, again, this is sidechained to the lead. So whenever the lead is playing, the high end of this low end the crunchiness and the high end of it is docking away. It is being more controlled, and then whenever the lead is not playing, it gives space to the low end again to rise up, so we can hear that crispiness of the saw of the low end. So this is what happens. And to give you an example of what that would sound like without the docking, this is what would actually happen. So what happens is that we have the two sounds clashing, right? We have too much high end, and the listener is having a very hard time choosing which of the elements to actually focus on. Do you want to focus on the low end, which has this crispy saw wave, or do you want to focus on the lead itself? So again, to handle this issue, we have a multi-band compressor coming in and not touching the low end, because we want the low end stable again, untouched. We only want the high frequencies to actually duck away when the lead is playing, because the lead only has high-end information, right? So we only need the high end to actually not be present at the same time of the lead. Okay, the last element in this section is this violin, which again is the same sample as in the intro. So again, we have this consistency throughout the track. This violin really just acts as a layer to play with the lead, to make it more interesting, and to also fill in the gaps within the parts of the lead not playing, because this one is also sidechained to the lead, as you can hear here. So again, everything as much as we can is sidechained to the lead to make it as clean as possible, to give it as much space as we can possibly. And this is something I will do in every of my projects. Whenever you can, you should use sidechain without it sounding unnatural. But in these instances where the lead is taking all of the presence and all of the energy, it's a good idea to see if you can sidechain some elements to the lead. So the next part is the build-up leading up to the climax, and for this I had something I wanted to show you, so I'm going to play the part through and then I'm going to show you what I mean. So in this build-up I actually used two different effects to make sure that the climax is hitting real hard. So in this instance it would be cutting away some of the high and low frequencies leading up to the actual climax, and also introducing some reverb to, you know, mask and blend everything together in the build-up. So now I'm going to play the part again where I cycle these things in and out so you can hear the difference. So again, the cutting of frequencies is a common practice because it really makes sure, especially when you cut out the low end before, that the drop is really hitting hard, right? So not having any low frequencies leading up to, and also actually you can do the same with the high frequencies to make sure that everything is expanding when you're actually hitting the drop. And the same thing can be done with something like a reverb or any effect that is really blending things together or making things more unclear. So the reverb is making a tail of everything, right? So blending everything together leading up to the actual climax, which is kind of making everything a little muddy and a little bit unclear. And then we cut away the reverb right before the drop so that everything is sharp and hitting hard right on the drop. Moving on to the last part here, we have the drop. And of course we have the lead itself, we have the kick playing, and we have some side chaining and something else to look into here. So for the lead, the layers are of course the same, but what's interesting is the side chaining method. And generally for side chaining, I'm using shaper box or volume shaper, and it's side chained to trigger whenever the kick is playing, of course. So the settings I've used in this case is pretty close to the actual preset. It's a little bit more pulled back than the preset, but it's pretty close. And for the mix in this case, I'm only using 23%. It's a little bit less of what I would normally use. Normally I'll find myself using between 30 to 40%, but that's also kind of, in my opinion, an artistic choice if you want the pumping to be very aggressive or very transparent. So in this case, I was happy with 23, and obviously in this case I was going for that very transparent side chaining. In reality, what you want from the side chaining is mostly just ducking away to make space for the attack part of the kick. Sometimes, again, it can be an artistic effect, so that if you want that pumping effect, that can also be achieved with the side chaining, obviously. But mostly what I'm after personally is just ducking away so I can make space for the punch of the kick. Moving on, let's look at something that I also incorporate in every track of mine. This is a saw wave playing underneath the kick and underneath the lead. And so this patch is basically just a standard stereo saw wave, but the interesting thing is it kind of sounds weird on its own, right? And that's because it is matched to fit in with this specific track. So what I find is that often I need something to fill in the gaps underneath the actual drop. So let's play the drop here without this and then cycle it in and out so you can see what I mean. To me, it's almost as if the drop or the climax here is too clean without this saw wave playing underneath it. And again, I find myself using this in every project. Sometimes I use more of it and sometimes I use less of it. Kind of depends on the project. Sometimes the kick itself in the tail has enough of that crispiness and that high-end information to fill out the gap that is necessary. And I see that many professional tracks is using that instead of the saw wave that I'm filling in with here. But again, this is something that I'm using in every track, and it's very useful again to just fill out, especially the low-end stereo, to just fill out every inch of your drop. Next up, let's look at the kick. So this is a rendered version of these 5 layers, which is the kick. Okay, so for each of the layers we have this, we have the punch part. And then we have a reverb part of that. And then we have the very first part, the click or the tick of the punch. Then we have the low end of the punch. And then we have the tail on its own. So here the punch. and with the tail. And so exported, this is what the finished kick sounds like. And you may be asking, why would I export when we have the exact layers, the exact same sound right here in 5 layers, which I could also just use in the project as is. And so there's actually a couple of reasons for this. One thing which is a more technical issue or thing that you have to be aware of is, for myself, I had some timing issues caused by other plugins in the project or some other fault within the project or in your DAW. This kind of messed up the kick. That can be a cause of issue. The next thing is, when you have a setup like this, your low end can often bleed into the punch. I'm using a volume shaper here to make sure that only the tail that I need, nothing more, is actually in here. But even so, because we're dealing with low end, some of the low end can bleed onto your punch going to the next kick. And that in itself can cause some issues, or at least change the sound that you may not want. And then there's the practicality of just, when you want to, as in here, make some different edits and kick rolls and so on, having export is much easier to work with. So there's a lot of reasons why you would actually export your kick and then work with it that way within the project. So that's also what I recommend you to do. So moving on to this very last bit, I had someone asking me about how I made this outro type of lead. And so I'm gonna walk through that real quick. This is an export, but it's made with Silent 1. Basically a very acidy type of lead. Sounds like this. And so I intentionally made space in the very high frequencies, because then I'm going to fill that out with, again, using the technique as earlier in this project, the white noise, using that to fill in the gaps. And so I can customize this to make it very aggressive and very screamy using the white noise. So the white noise layer on its own sounds like this. And so these two sounds together sounds like this. And then of course we have a reverse reverb leading up to it, so we really have that hard impact, and then leading directly into the outro drop with some other kicks going. This is what the ending sounds like. And then rounding off the project, we can look at what is on the master. So I have this multiband compressor on the master, which is affecting every sound in the project. Then that is going into this Gullfoss, which is more or less just correcting the tonality of the track throughout. So again, every sound is going into this plugin. And what you'll see is only very subtle changes that it does to the overall balance in the project. In the end, I have an Oxford inflator. It is doing absolutely nothing. It is just making sure that nothing is going beyond clipping. So again, 0 dB. This is not a limiter. This is just a hard clip. There's no effects on it, so it's not adding any harmonics or any fancy stuff. It's just a hard clip. And so to see every of the plugins in action, here's what they do individually. If you haven't heard the full Gravitational Forces yet, you can find it on your favorite streaming platform. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, make sure you subscribe, because there's going to be a lot more videos coming from me, a lot more regularly. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see each other very soon again. Bye.